Democratic Party is lost in every single way. They lost the White House, the Senate, and they are divided over why and how they should move forward. They can't even agree on how to counterpunch to Trump because the resistance has been so futile. But at least they're taking a step in the right direction, I guess, right? They elected a new chairman, Ken Martin, who's described as a nice guy from Minnesota who's also a knife fighter. But it looks like the delegates went in a different direction than expected. They didn't go for the establishment pick. They didn't go for Ben Wickler, who is the chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, who Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries wanted, who the donors wanted. They went with Ken instead. So we'll see what that means for the party. Kamala Harris made a little bit of a cameo. She dropped in via video, and that caused a little bit of a stir. We'll see what people really thought about her appearance and whether she will be the leader of the party. I have a true Democratic Party insider on the line. Alex Hoffman is a former Democratic National Committee official, and he is going to give us the scoop on what people were really talking about behind closed doors this weekend. Alex, thanks so much for joining the show. So you were at the DNC's winter meeting this weekend in National Harbor, Maryland, running the campaign for the finance chairman who won, Chris Corge. What was the vibe like? I mean, I read this story in the New York Times where they spoke to 50 different senior Democrats who basically admitted that the party was lost, but for all different reasons. None of them could agree on why they lost the election, what would be the best step forward, and how they should go after Trump. The New York Times used the phrase leaderless, rudderless, and divided to describe the party. What was it like this weekend at the meeting?
There was no shortage of alcohol being drunk, that's for sure. And that's probably the easiest way to get through what was happening. No, I mean, look, I think, going into the meeting, there was a lot of apathy. There was a lot of just dejected Democrats wandering in the wilderness. And I think a lot of members, and people forget, this is like an insider baseball. There's only 440 something members of the DNC, right? They're the insiders of how the party works at a state level, but really at the just DNC level. And, I think the last month or so of this chairs race, it started getting people more back into the, who are our leaders going to be? What's the direction? What's the future going to be? And, they were in just full election insider mode. And I think, once the chairs race finished, then it was, I think the whole election itself took about 12 plus hours, which I know is crazy, but they literally sat there for 12, almost 13 hours to elect the whole slate of the rest of the officers. And I'd say by the end of that, everybody probably felt like we were in the exact same position that we were in right before that.
Interesting. And why do you think that was? Because there's no new messaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think the complaints that exist in the ecosystem are still the same, right? It's that, there's still no good messaging. We've got issues with donors. We've got issues with, sort of how we sell our brand. We have issues of how we respond to Trump. We have just this, the donor fatigue, the feeling around just, generally that we've just lost and we're reeling from this. And, now there's this hope that, we've got this new leadership slate. We're going to, start to rebuild, kind of the phoenix rising from the ashes, if you will. And, I think there's a reason that the chairs race was a one ballot election, right? People were convinced it was going to be a multiple ballot. People were going to be like old school 1970s, 80s convention floor whipping on the floor, trying to trade votes and trying to, go ballot for ballot. And it was a one.
It's like finding the Pope of the party,
right? Yeah. I was saying this is basically a conclave meets a student government election. I think that was the best way to put it.
So President Biden beams into the convention and he gives his talk and doesn't get much of an applause or anything. Kamala Harris, though, she drops in with a video call just like President Biden, but there's a lot of rousing applause and momentum. How was it interpreted? Was that just happened to be a small portion of very excited people about Kamala Harris, or is the feeling universally that she is the leader of the party and the presumptive frontrunner for 2028?
Yeah, I think it was definitely that there was a lot of activists and volunteers who were in the audience, and, she was our Democratic nominees, and everybody, just kind of clapped and was like, yeah, good for her. I would say that they're of the people who are actually in the room, whether, they're the DNC members or the operatives or the folks the donors that were there. I don't think there's a single one of them that was saying that Kamala Harris is the leader of the party, nor should she run again. I mean, I don't think I found a single person who thought that was a good idea for us, myself included. I don't think that's a good idea in any way, shape, or form. And also, I think, if this election was any kind of indicator about anything about the party, is that we're kind of ready to just move on, go to the next thing, right? I mean, as much as Ken Martin and some of the other officers that are on the slate are the quote unquote next thing, it's still moving on, right? We're still going to the next group of this. It's still the, getting ready to eventually launch the version of the primaries that are going to exist. And, look, if she wants to run, more power to her. But just to remind everyone, in 2020, she didn't even make it to Iowa. So just because you were the nominee in 100 days and, did whatever they did doesn't make you the front runner, doesn't mean you're going to win a primary.
All right, let's talk about the guy who actually won, Ken Martin. There's kind of this feeling about him that he is a knife fighter, and that's what the party needs. I know when you and I had spoken in the past, you mentioned that you thought Rahm Emanuel would be the right type of guy for this job because he's, gutless essentially and could really move the party forward in a way where he'd take no prisoners, especially when dealing with Trump and the Republican Party. So this is what John Bonciano, who's worked with Ken at the Association of State Democratic Committees, said about him. Ken is a Minnesota nice, has a pleasant, earnest ability to engage with people publicly, and it is also a private ruthlessness and a coldness that only comes when you've lived in 10-degree below weather half your life. Ken will cut you if he has to, but that ruthlessness is what we need to achieve electoral success. Now, would you say that's an accurate description of Ken and what the party needs right now?
Well, I mean, first of all, so you mentioned the Rahm Emanuel piece before that. I mean, yes, I was actively trying to get Rahm to run, and I don't know if this is a PG podcast or not, but as you know, I'm a true New Yorker on the inside, so there's no filter. My line was that Rahm Emanuel's a motherfucker, and we need a motherfucker to beat these motherfuckers, right? And I legitimately was like, we need someone who's willing to, instead of this they go low, we go high bullshit, it's they go low, we go razor blade under the tongue low and, try to win elections. And, look, I've known Ken for a while, and, I was at the DNC when he was there, and, I think Ken, is a very nice guy. And, I think to a lot of people, certainly I think to folks who didn't vote for him, I think they viewed him either as the nice guy or they didn't vote for him because of the other thing you said, which is that, maybe they felt like they've been stabbed before. Personally, I think, Ken is a kind of midpoint, right? I think the average activist and person he's going to talk to when he does TV and media hits, he does come off as like a good, nice guy, but also, and just someone who's like values are the values of the Democratic Party. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be afraid to do the hard stuff that needs to get done, which is, cutting a lot of dead weight that exists in that building and in the party, making some serious changes that need to happen to the party. And, I think, yeah, there are going to be some people who are going to be really upset that they felt like that maybe he or the party stabbed them or threw them out or did whatever. But, I mean, we have to get to this point where how often are we going to keep losing elections and keep having the same people who are part of those things and not blame them? And then when someone finally says, hey, your time's up, goodbye, get out, you're going to say, oh, he's just an evil guy who's stabs people in the back. No. It's just you lost, right? Goodbye. It's time to go, right? And, it's a new administration. I mean, just like a new administration of the White House or anywhere else, it's his prerogative to come in and say, I want a new team that's going to do new things with new ideas and new messaging. And, I hope he does. I really do. Because, I mean, at this point, couldn't get much worse, right? I can't imagine that he could do a worse job than anybody else, and I can't imagine that we could possibly be in a worse situation if he were to do any of those things. If we were, but then again, it's Democrats, we always seem to find a way, so maybe I'm wrong, but I hope not.
He's got an incredible life story too. His mother had him at 15 and they lived in and out of shelters, and he said that's where he got his grit and why he's a bit abrasive, and perhaps that's why there have been a lot of stories in the past few days talking about how many people are kind of felt that they were rubbed the wrong way by him. I do think it's interesting that the Democratic establishment did not support him. In fact, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, they all endorsed Ben Wickler, who is the chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. Basically, the delegates just said, F you, we're not going with who you want. Why do you think they chose Ken over what the establishment wanted.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, the I will say, since I was around in 2017, helping out in some of the races in 2017 too, and I think there's this track record of folks betting on a certain horse getting into the DNC elections for a variety of reasons, and people just being completely wrong because they don't understand the difference between outside Democratic ecosystem noise and voting 440 something DNC members, right? And like the inside baseball politics that gets played with that. I think Ken is not under any false pretense that this is going to be hard work, and that there is donor fatigue out right there, right? Donors are angry, right? They're upset at how things went. They don't understand how we raised, $2 billion and basically it feels like we flushed it all down the drain. They don't understand why we sent $700,000 on a Call Her Daddy set and somehow and a shit ton of money on fans for her travel, but we don't know why we didn't spend more money in certain swing states, right? Like that's where their heads are at now. Yeah. I mean, I think the Democratic Party needs to get back to this old way of thinking about donors, right? It used to be that we used to treat donors like we're the concierge service and what can we do for you, and then I think in the last couple of cycles we started treating donors like we're the only game in town. You're going to show up for us anyway, and don't ask questions because we just need your money and we just see you as a dollar sign. And that's just like the wrong way to look at it, right? Like we should be looking at donors, especially, and by the way, this is at like the lowest $1 level, all the way up to the $1 million level. Like they're shareholders in a Fortune 500 company, right? Like these are people who are giving their money saying, I believe in this group because they, I believe in their values. Here, Fortune 500 company, go build this thing. And I think what they're sick of is that every 4 years we build a Fortune 500 company, knock it all down to the ground, and just act like, oh, we should just like restart this all over again. Just because he's in there and there's new leadership and we're going to work on talking about new messaging doesn't mean that this is going to convince people. I mean, there's that line everyone says all the time that like, Republicans fall in line, Democrats fall in love, right? And I think Democrats are out there waiting to fall in love with their next candidate, and that's who's going to be our leader. And instead, we're just going to wander in the wilderness for a couple of years and figure out what that might look like until that happens. But, hopefully, and to be clear, people think the DNC is where messaging happens. Maybe, maybe not. Really what their main job is building the infrastructure that the party needs to be successful. And if Ken can take the next couple of years to build up a war chest, to really build out our digital infrastructure tools, to start really, really working on our state parties and building them up to be really strong. Yeah, whoever the next leader is or whoever wins eventual primaries, hopefully is going to inherit a really strong DNC. And if that's the case, we might actually win elections again. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that Ken, unlike some of the other candidates, said that the DNC needs an autopsy report on the election.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, I was around when we lost last time, and that was like a dirty word saying autopsy, and they
didn't do it.
Well, I mean, they tried to call it something different, and they wanted to like make it sound like we weren't like what the Republicans were post Mitt Romney, and like there was all this like buzzword stuff, and like honestly, we just have to call it what it is, right? We lost badly, right? Like all this, the two lines I couldn't stand at this DNC meeting. One was people trying to say that Trump didn't have a mandate because it was so close. It's like, no, he won. Like, we just need to admit, yes, he has a mandate. Like, yes, we got absolutely destroyed. It wasn't for any specific reason. There was a laundry list of reasons of why we lost. And because there were so many reasons, like, yeah, we should have an autopsy. Yeah, we should figure out what we did wrong. And, like, that's a good thing, right? You don't think companies, when they make a bad business move, or sports teams, when their team collapses, don't look at what they did and say, all right, how do we fix our mistakes and figure out how to not do this again? I mean, everyone should want that, right? Every operative, donor, just, average activist should say, yeah, Democratic Party should take a really hard look at what the hell went wrong last time. Look at all the laundry list of problems that we completely fucked up on and say, yeah, let's fix this so that maybe we can start winning elections again. And if that also means in that autopsy report, it also says that a bunch of people who have been in the Democratic ecosystem need to just go kick rocks and not be part of this anymore, great. Yeah, whatever it's going to take for us to start winning. Like that line that Trump used to say about, oh, we're going to do so much winning, you're going to get sick and tired of winning. I just want a little bit, just like a tiny bit of winning, right? Like, I'm not asking for a ton. I just want a little bit right now.
Oh, Alex, yeah. I mean, did anything come out of this meeting that everyone can agree upon?
On
Like any
the
messaging
I mean, the
or
messaging,
anything?
no. I mean, because I think like in the end, like everybody kind of fought these big elections, patted themselves on the back that all right, we're finally through this. We have a good slate, and that was it. I mean, look, they elected, besides Ken, they elected 3 vice chairs, a secretary, a treasurer, and a finance chair, right? So, I mean, this is our new quote unquote party leadership. This is going to be who's presenting to the world on MSNBC and CNN and in the Twitter blue sky ecosystem, right? And yeah, right, exactly, right. And so like there's no one who knows what's going to come next from here. I think everybody's just like, all right, we elected these people, let's see what happens.
His biggest battle probably coming up is the calendar, right? Choosing what the first primary state will be. Obviously, they knocked off New Hampshire for Biden and started in South Carolina, which was not very popular in New Hampshire and pissed off a lot of people and created the impression that there was a fix inside of the party and that the party leaders just decide who's the nominee. And if they can't directly do it, then they do things like that. Do you get the feeling that Ken Martin understands this, that that's part of the reason why the Democratic Party has such a damaged image?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll say there's probably nobody better to fight that narrative that we're these coastal elites than a guy from the Midwest who grew up living in shelters at one point with a single mom, right? Like, I mean, there's probably nobody better to say something like the opposite of that. That said, like, look, yes, I think you're right. The one of the biggest challenges is going to be the primary schedule, the eventual debate schedule, and, the eventual joint fundraising agreements between these campaigns and the DNC and what those victory fund agreements look like, right? The messaging around the primaries and like where they're going to be, I think is just one of many issues that are part of the messaging problem with the party. And like, look, on paper, South Carolina made a lot of sense, right? Like, much more diverse than New Hampshire and Iowa. Obviously Jim Clyburn and, his connection with Jamie had a lot to do with that change. And yes, the New Hampshire delegation was very, very upset about it, and I believe still is. If you ask most DNC members, I think they view that as kind of a settled issue now, and that, it is what it is. This is the new calendar. It's the new thing. I have to imagine they're going to keep that the same, that it's going to be South Carolina again first. How the rules and procedures and how that shakes out, that's going to get figured out in probably the next year or two. The other big thing is going to be the convention, right? Figuring out where the next convention city should be. A lot of people were like, look, maybe we should just have it back in Chicago again, have JB write another blank check. I've heard a lot of people talk about Vegas. I've had a lot of people talk about Atlanta, right? I think there's some people who are like, let's go back to Philadelphia again. He's going to have a lot of tough decisions to make. And, because there is no White House kind of thumb on the scale telling you what to do right now, he's going to have a lot more freedom to make some of these tough decisions.
Okay. Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, always insightful to talk
anytime.
to you.